The Habsburg Jaw and the dark side of royalty. Throughout history, the ruling classes have often been obsessed with preserving their lineage, ensuring that power, wealth, and influence remain within a tightly controlled family structure. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the case of the Habsburg Dynasty, a European royal house that ruled vast territories for centuries. Their dominance stretched from Spain to Austria, encompassing the Holy Roman Empire and beyond. However, their commitment to maintaining pure bloodlines led to one of the most infamous examples of royal inbreeding, manifesting in a distinct physical deformity, the Habsburg jaw. This extreme underbite, also known as mandibular prognathism, became a grotesque symbol of the hidden costs of royal privilege. Yet, the Habsburg jaw was not just a superficial trait, it was a sign of a much darker reality, one of genetic decline, political consequences, and the tragic suffering of those born into this once mighty family. The most notorious bearer of the Habsburg jaw was Charles II of Spain, whose reign 1665 to 1700 marked the final, tragic chapter of the Spanish Habsburg line. Charles II was so severely afflicted by the effects of inbreeding that he was physically and intellectually disabled, unable to properly govern his kingdom. His deformities were not limited to his exaggerated jaw. He suffered from severe developmental delays, infertility, and a host of mysterious illnesses that baffled doctors of the time. He was described as weak, sickly, and mentally unfit, the ultimate victim of a royal obsession with keeping power within the family. By the time he died, childless and incapable of producing an heir, Spain was plunged into the War of Spanish Succession, a brutal conflict that reshaped European politics. His life and death serve as a chilling reminder of the price paid for aristocratic vanity and misguided genetic arrogance. But Charles II was not the only Habsburg to suffer. The deformity had been accumulating through generations of strategic marriages between close relatives. Maximilian I, Charles V, Philip II of Spain, and numerous other Habsburg rulers displayed varying degrees of mandibular prognathism. The condition was often accompanied by other genetic weaknesses, including epilepsy, intellectual disabilities, and weakened immune systems. Their attempt to breed an unbroken line of royal rulers instead produced a lineage that was biologically compromised. In some cases, these rulers struggled to eat or speak properly, and many experienced premature deaths due to their fragile health. Why did the Habsburgs persist in such reckless inbreeding? The answer lies in their political ideology. European royalty of the time was governed by the idea of divine right, the belief that monarchs were chosen by God to rule. To dilute their bloodline with commoners or foreigners was seen as a threat to their sacred authority. Intermarriage between close family members, cousins, uncles and nieces, and even uncles and grandnieces, was considered a way to maintain legitimacy and consolidate power. The Habsburgs did not just marry for love or alliances, they married to ensure that their ruling blood remained pure. Ironically, this obsession with purity led to increasing genetic defects, which ultimately weakened their empire rather than strengthening it. One of the darkest aspects of the Habsburg genetic decline was the suffering it inflicted upon individuals who were born into this royal family. Unlike commoners, these rulers had no choice in their fate. They were bred to rule, expected to fulfill their dynastic duties, despite their physical or mental limitations. Some of them, like Charles II, were openly ridiculed by their own court, whispered about as living proof of their family's disastrous breeding strategy. Physicians and advisors attempted all sorts of remedies, herbal treatments, mystical cures, and desperate prayers, but no amount of superstition could undo centuries of inbreeding. The real tragedy was that these monarchs were treated more as political pawns than human beings, their suffering ignored in favor of dynastic ambition. Beyond the physical consequences, The Habsburg obsession with blood purity had massive political implications. The eventual collapse of the Spanish Habsburgs, caused in large part by Charles II's inability to produce an heir, led to war and instability across Europe. The Austrian branch of the family, though slightly less afflicted by the jaw deformity, also faced its own challenges. The genetic decline of ruling families often led to weaker rulers, which in turn led to declining empires. The idea that royalty was somehow inherently superior to commoners was slowly being dismantled, not by philosophy or revolution, but by nature itself. The Habsburg case serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked hereditary rule. Modern science has since confirmed what history had already proven. Excessive inbreeding leads to genetic disorders, physical deformities, and intellectual decline. Yet, the Habsburgs were far from the only ruling house to engage in such practices. Many European royal families intermarried to preserve their bloodlines, leading to other hereditary disorders, such as hemophilia, in the Russian and British royal families. The pursuit of dynastic purity came at the cost of human suffering, a hidden tragedy masked by the grandeur of royal palaces and elaborate ceremonies. The Habsburg Jaw has since become an infamous symbol of the consequences of royal inbreeding, but it is also a reminder of the fragile nature of power. No matter how mighty an empire may seem, if it is built on an unstable foundation, it will eventually collapse. The Habsburgs, once rulers of half of Europe, fell victim to their own arrogance. In trying to defy the natural laws of genetics, they ultimately sealed their fate. Today, the remnants of this dynasty can still be seen in history books, portraits, and genetic studies that examine the impact of centuries of inbreeding. The lesson they leave behind is not just one of biological caution, but of the dangers of unchecked ambition. The pursuit of absolute control, whether over genetics, politics, or society, almost always leads to unforeseen consequences. In the case of the Habsburgs, it was a slow, painful decline, written not in the history of battles and conquests, but in the faces of their own children. The pursuit of absolute control, whether over bloodlines, empires, or the future itself, often leads to unintended consequences. The Habsburgs believed that by keeping their lineage pure, they could preserve their power indefinitely, but their dynasty ultimately fell to its own weaknesses. Their story is a powerful illustration of the limits of human control over nature. No amount of royal decree or divine justification could prevent the inevitable genetic decline that centuries of inbreeding caused. The Habsburgs, in their arrogance, had ignored the basic principles of biology, believing themselves above the natural order. Beyond the genetic and political consequences, the cultural impact of the Habsburg Jaw and the dynasty's downfall was profound. The grotesque portraits of rulers like Charles II serve as eerie reminders of the physical toll of their policies. These images, once symbols of royal grandeur, have now become cautionary relics of a misguided belief in hereditary superiority. The Habsburgs, despite their vast empire, became synonymous with deformity and decline, a tragic reversal of their once mighty status. Even in the modern world, the legacy of the Habsburgs continues to be studied. Geneticists analyze their bloodlines to understand the effects of inbreeding. Historians dissect their policies to learn from their mistakes, and society at large reflects on the dangers of unchecked power. Though monarchy has largely faded in its traditional form, the Habsburgs remind us that any system built on artificial superiority, whether through birth, class, or race, will ultimately face collapse. Their story is not just one of royal misfortune, but of the broader human tendency to defy nature in the pursuit of control, often at a devastating cost.